She was just a poor girl. The mob boss's reckless gamble led to unexpected consequences. He was absolute darkness. She was the only ray of golden light brave enough to cross it. Michael Vane is not a hero. Known as the Dragon, he is a powerful Mafia billionaire who controls New York with discipline and cold precision. To him, emotions are weaknesses. Until the rainy night he notices Chloe, alone, fragile, holding wilted roses on a silent street. He brings her into his world believing everything can be controlled. He is wrong. Because when darkness meets light, it doesn't destroy it. It protects it. And when the dragon falls in love, he doesn't hesitate. He becomes the shield nothing can break. If your heart raced, just imagining that forbidden chemistry, you found your home. Here, we don't just tell stories, we live every emotion. Tap that subscribe button right now. Don't just be a spectator. Become part of this world where danger and romance walk hand in hand. Turn on notifications, because the next chapter will take your breath away. Word count goal, where 1,500-1,700 words, equivalent in pacing and depth. Focus, sensory immersion, internal conflict, the inciting incident. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Inside the back of the armored Maybach, the silence was absolute. It was a vacuum, sealed off from the chaos of the city by 3 inches of bulletproof glass and German engineering. The air smelled of conditioned leather, expensive cedar wood, and the lingering metallic scent of a deal just closed. Michael Vane stared out the tinted window, but he wasn't looking at the city. He owned the city. He was looking at his own reflection ghosting against the glass. 32 years old, a jawline that looked like it had been cut from granite, eyes the color of a stormy Atlantic Ocean. Dark, turbulent, and utterly devoid of warmth. He adjusted his cufflink, a subconscious tick. The platinum felt cold against his wrist. "The council is restless, sir." The voice came from the front seat. Silas, his driver, his shadow, his conscience, when Michael bothered to listen to one. "Taking over the docks has upset the ecosystem." Michael didn't blink. He watched a droplet of water streak down the outside of the glass, fighting gravity, only to be swallowed by the wind. "Let them be restless," Michael said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the quiet cabin. "Restlessness breeds mistakes, and I enjoy watching them make mistakes." He was bored. That was the dangerous truth he never spoke aloud. He had won. He had the money, the territory, the fear of his enemies. But victory tasted like ash. It was predictable. Everything in his life was a transaction. You pay X, you get Y. You threaten A, B retreats. Human nature was a boring, repetitive algorithm. The car slowed to a halt. A red light. Michael sighed. The sound sharpened the stillness. He hated stopping. Stopping meant thinking. He turned his head slightly, his gaze drifting to the sidewalk. It was a miserable night. The wind was whipping the rain sideways, turning umbrellas inside out, sending pedestrians scurrying for the cover of awnings like rats fleeing a sinking ship. And then, he saw the yellow. It was a bright, offensive spot of color in a monochromatic world. A raincoat. Or, more accurately, a cheap plastic poncho that was 3 sizes too big for the person wearing it. She was standing on the corner, unprotected by the buildings. In her arms, she cradled a bundle wrapped in plastic. Flowers. Roses. Wilting, sad, pathetic things that had no business existing in this weather. Chloe. He didn't know her name then. He just knew she was an anomaly. He watched, captivated by the sheer absurdity of it. She was shivering. He could see it from 20 feet away. A tremor that started in her shoulders and rattled all the way down to her soaked sneakers. Her hair, plastered to her skull, dripped water into her eyes, but she didn't wipe it away. She just stood there, holding out a single rose to a businessman rushing past. The man didn't even look at her. He bumped her shoulder. Hard. Michael saw her stumble. She slipped on the wet concrete, one knee hitting the pavement. Inside the car, Michael's hand clenched on his knee. His knuckles turned white. A physical reaction to something that had nothing to do with him. Stay down, he thought. Give up. Go home. But she didn't. With a resilience that was almost painful to watch, she pushed herself up. She checked the flowers first, protecting the merchandise before checking her own bleeding knee. Then, she stood back up, put that ridiculous plastic smile back on her face, and extended the rose to the next person. Silas, Michael said. The word was barely a whisper. Sir? Look at her. Silas glanced in the rearview mirror, then toward the sidewalk. Just a beggar, sir, or a hustler. The city is full of them. No, Michael murmured, his eyes narrowing. She's not begging. She's selling. She believes she still has something of value. He felt a sudden, sharp spike of irritation. It offended him. Her hope offended him. It was a lie. The world was going to crush her. It was already crushing her, and she was too stupid or too stubborn to lie down and die. It challenged his entire worldview. He believed everyone was corruptible, everyone was weak, everyone would choose the easy way out if pressed hard enough. How much? Michael asked. Sir? How much to break that spirit? How much until she drops those flowers and realizes nobody cares? Silas paused. He knew his boss well enough to know this wasn't a rhetorical question. Everyone has a breaking point, Michael. But some break quieter than others. The light turned green. Wait, Michael commanded. The car didn't move. Behind them, a horn honked. Michael ignored it. His gaze was locked on the girl. She looked up. Through the rain, through the distance, and through the tinted glass that she couldn't possibly see through. Her eyes seemed to lock onto his. They were wide, dark, and hollowed out by exhaustion. But there was fire in them. A tiny flickering spark of defiance. I want that fire, Michael thought. The thought was intrusive, alien. I want to see if I can snuff it out. Or if it will burn me. Roll down the window, Michael said. Sir, it's freezing, and security protocol. Roll down the window. The glass slid down with a silent hum. The noise of the city crashed in. The hissing tires, the angry horns, the drumming rain. The cold air bit at Michael's face, sharp and wet. The girl, Chloe, jumped at the movement. She looked at the gap in the dark car, at the man sitting in the shadows. For a second, nobody moved. The rain fell between them like a curtain. You're ruining the merchandise, Michael said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried effortlessly over the storm. It was a voice used to being obeyed. Chloe blinked, water dripping from her eyelashes. She stepped closer, hesitant. She hugged the bundle of roses tighter to her chest, as if they were gold bullion. Would you like to buy one, sir? Her voice was shaking. Not just from cold, from hunger, from fear. But it was clear. A soft melodic sound that had no business being on this street corner. $5. For a dozen. $5. He was wearing a tie that cost $600. Michael leaned forward, just enough for the street lamp to illuminate half his face. He saw her breath hitch. He knew what he looked like. Predatory, severe. Most people stepped back when he leaned in. She didn't. She leaned in too, drawn by the heat escaping the car. I don't want the flowers, Michael said. Chloe's face fell, a microscopic collapse of hope that tugged at something in Michael's chest, a sensation he chose to interpret as curiosity. She started to turn away. I want to make a purchase, Michael continued, but not for the dead plants. She froze. She turned back slowly, her eyes darting to his hands, checking for weapons, checking for danger. She was street smart. She knew the look of a wolf. I don't sell anything else, she said, her voice firming up. She pulled the oversized poncho tighter, a futile gesture of modesty. Michael let out a short, dry laugh. It lacked humor. I'm not interested in your body, little flower. I'm interested in your time. He opened the door. The interior light flooded the wet pavement, reflecting in the puddles like spilled gold. Get in. No. She took a step back. You're freezing. You're bleeding, Michael noted, his eyes dropping to her knee. And you have sold exactly 0 roses in the last 20 minutes. I've been watching. I'm fine, she lied. You are a terrible liar. Michael extended a hand. He didn't touch her. He just left it there, palm open, hovering in the space between the dry luxury of the car and the brutal reality of the street. I have a proposition. A job. It pays more than $5. And it's dry. Chloe stared at his hand. It was large, manicured, steady. It looked like a hand that could strangle or save. She looked down the street. It was empty. The bus wasn't coming for another hour. She couldn't feel her toes anymore. The eviction notice in her pocket felt heavy, like a lead weight dragging her down. She looked back at Michael. Why? She whispered. The wind almost stole the word. Because I'm bored, Michael said, the truth slipping out before he could dress it up. And because you look like you're about to collapse. And I hate wasted potential. It was a gamble. For both of them. For Michael, it was a break in the pattern. A variable he couldn't predict. For Chloe, it was survival. She took a step forward. Then another. She reached out, her hand trembling violently, her skin red and raw from the cold. When her fingers brushed his palm, the shock was electric. Her skin was ice. His was fire. The contrast was so sharp, so violent, that Michael almost pulled back. It wasn't just a touch. It was a collision. He felt the fragility of her bones, the desperate strength in her grip. He closed his fingers around hers. He pulled. Not hard, just enough to guide her. She stumbled into the car, a wet, shivering mess of plastic and cheap fabric. She brought the smell of ozone, exhaust, and wet earth into his sanitized sanctuary. Michael pulled the door shut. The silence returned instantly. The rain became nothing more than a visual effect outside the glass. Chloe sat on the edge of the leather seat, trying to make herself small, trying not to drip on the upholstery. She was shivering so hard her teeth chattered, a tiny, rhythmic clicking sound in the quiet. Drive, Silas, Michael said. Where to, sir? Michael looked at the girl. She was staring at her hands, overwhelmed by the warmth, her eyes drooping with the sudden rush of temperature change. She looked like a drowned kitten that had washed up on the steps of a palace. He shouldn't do this. He knew, with a strategist's instinct, that this was a mistake. She was a variable he couldn't control. Home, Michael said. Chloe's head snapped up. Panic flared in her eyes. Home? My home, Michael corrected, turning to look at her fully. Relax. You're not a prisoner. You're an experiment. He took off his suit jacket. The movement was fluid, graceful. He held it out to her. She stared at the silk lining. I'll get it wet. It's just a jacket. She hesitated, then took it. She wrapped it around her shoulders. It engulfed her. It was heavy, warm, and it smelled like him. Rich, dark, intoxicating. Michael watched her bury her nose slightly in the collar, an unconscious seeking of comfort. His gut twisted. A knot of tension tightened in his lower stomach. He had told Silas he wanted to see if she would break. He had told himself he wanted to prove that her innocence was a fraud. But as he watched her huddled in his jacket, blinking against the harsh reality of her luck, Michael realized the bet had already changed. He wasn't wondering if she would break. He was wondering what would happen when he was the one who had to put her back together. The car accelerated, gliding smoothly into the dark artery of the city, carrying the wolf and the flower toward a destination neither of them was ready for. The elevator ride was a lesson in physics and humiliation. Chloe felt the gravity press against the soles of her wet sneakers as the car shot upward, ascending faster than her mind could process. It wasn't a normal elevator. There were no buttons, no creaking cables, no smell of stale gum. It was a silent silver capsule that moved with the smoothness of a heartbeat. She stood in the corner, as far away from Michael Vane as the 6-foot square space allowed. She was dripping, literally. A steady, rhythmic drip, drip, drip from the hem of her cheap poncho onto the polished steel floor. Every drop sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Michael didn't look at her. He stood in the center, hands in his pockets, staring at the digital floor indicator climbing higher. 40, 50, 60. He dominated the space. It wasn't just his height, or the width of his shoulders under the white dress shirt. It was his stillness. He didn't sway with the motion of the elevator. He was an anchor. Chloe hugged his suit jacket tighter around herself. It was dry. It was warm. It smelled of sandalwood and something sharper, like ozone before a lightning strike. Wearing it felt like a transgression, like stealing fire from the gods. "My floor is delicate," Michael said suddenly. Chloe flinched. I can take my shoes off." "I wasn't talking about the shoes." He turned his head, his gray eyes catching hers in the reflection of the steel doors. "I was talking about the quiet. I value it. Don't break it unless necessary." Ding. The doors slid open. If Chloe thought the elevator was intimidating, the penthouse was terrifying. It wasn't a home. It was a fortress of glass and night. The entire front wall was a window, a seamless pane offering a panoramic view of Seattle's skyline. The city lights sprawled out below like a carpet of diamonds, cold and glittering. The furniture was low, dark, and Italian. Sharp angles and leather that looked like it had never been sat on. There were no photos, no clutter, no life. Chloe hesitated at the threshold. Her instinct was to apologize. For existing. For being dirty. For bringing the smell of the gutter into this museum. "In," Michael commanded, walking past her. He didn't wait. He walked straight to a wet bar made of black marble, pouring amber liquid into a crystal glass. The sound of the crystal clinking was the only noise in the vast room. Chloe took a step. Her wet sneaker squeaked on the hardwood floor. She winced. "Sir?" she whispered. Michael took a drink, the whiskey burning a path down his throat, grounding him. He turned around, leaning his hip against the marble. He looked at her. Really looked at her. Under the harsh lights of the hallway, she looked worse than she had in the car. Her lips were blue. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, highlighting the dark circles under her eyes. A smudge of dirt marred her cheekbone. She looked like a bruise in human form. And yet, she was standing straight, chin up, hands clutching his jacket, but eyes alert, assessing exits, assessing him. "Michael," he corrected. "My name is Michael." "Michael." She tested the name. It felt heavy on her tongue. "Why am I here?" "Because you were cold. People don't pick up strangers because they're cold." "I do when they're bad for business," he lied smoothly. "You were depressing the property value of that street corner." Chloe's eyes narrowed slightly. "So you're a philanthropist? A saint who rescues girls from the rain?" Michael laughed. It was a low, dark sound that shivered down Chloe's spine. He set the glass down. "I am neither of those things, Chloe. I am a businessman. And right now, I have an empty guest room and a surplus of boredom." He pushed off the counter and walked toward her. He moved like a predator. Fluid. Silent. Chloe's breath hitched. She wanted to step back, but her pride rooted her to the spot. He stopped 2 feet away, close enough for her to feel the heat radiating from him, close enough for him to smell the rain and the faint, sweet scent of the crushed roses on her hands. "The deal is simple," Michael said, his voice dropping an octave. "You stay here. 1 week. You recover. You eat my food. You sleep in a bed that doesn't hurt your back. And in return?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What do you want?" Michael looked at her lips. They were chapped, trembling. He felt a sudden, violent urge to trace the shape of them with his thumb. He killed the thought instantly, crushing it under the heel of his control. "In return," he said, his eyes hardening, "you proved me wrong." "About what?" About survival. About innocence. He turned away, unable to look at the confusion in her eyes any longer. It made him feel something, and he didn't do feelings. Go. Second door on the left. There's a shower. Use it. If you drip on my Persian rug, I'll deduct it from your payment. Payment? $10,000, Michael said over his shoulder. For 1 week of your time, if you last. Chloe stopped breathing. $10,000. That was her rent for a year. That was her father's debt. That was freedom. And if I leave? She asked. Then you leave with nothing but the cold. He didn't wait for an answer. He walked to the window and stared out at the city, turning his back on her. But in the reflection of the glass, he watched. He watched her stand there for a long minute, warring with fear and desperation. He saw her hand tighten on his jacket. Then, she turned and walked toward the hallway. When he heard the bathroom door click shut, Michael let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. His hand shook slightly as he reached for his glass again. Inside the bathroom, Chloe collapsed. She slid down the marble wall until she hit the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. The room was bigger than her entire apartment. It was filled with white stone, gold fixtures, and piles of fluffy white towels that looked like clouds. She was shaking. Not from the cold anymore, but from the adrenaline crash. $10,000. It was a trap. It had to be. Men like him, men with eyes like storms and suits worth more than cars, didn't give money away. They traded. But as she looked down at her hands, red, raw, covered in grime, she realized she didn't care. If it was a trap, at least it was a warm one. She stood up on shaky legs and turned on the shower. She peeled off the wet clothes, the poncho, the cheap uniform, the worn-out socks. She caught her reflection in the massive mirror. She looked fragile. Her ribs pressed against her skin. There were bruises on her shins from bumping into tables. She looked like something that could be snapped in half by a strong wind, or a strong man. She stepped into the shower. The hot water hit her like a physical blow, stinging her frozen skin before soothing it. She groaned, leaning her forehead against the tiles, letting the steam envelop her. For the first time in years, she felt heat seep into her bones. Out in the living room, Michael couldn't focus. He had opened his laptop, trying to review the quarterly reports for the shipping lines, but the numbers were blurring. All he could hear was the shower running. The sound of the water was faint, muffled by the heavy door, but to his heightened senses, it was deafening. He knew she was in there, naked, vulnerable. He wasn't a voyeur. He had had women, beautiful, sophisticated women who knew the game. But the thought of this girl, this scrap of a thing, washing away the city's filth in his shower, it felt intimate in a way that disturbed him. He was pacing now, a caged tiger in a suit. Why had he done this? To prove she's not special, he told himself. To watch the grit wash off and reveal just another greedy human underneath. But when the water stopped, silence rushed back into the penthouse, heavy and pregnant with expectation. A few minutes later, the door creaked open. Michael turned. Chloe stood in the hallway. She was wearing one of the robes he kept for guests, a thick, plush white fabric that was far too big for her. She had rolled up the sleeves, and the hem dragged on the floor. Her hair was wet, combed back, dark and sleek against her pale skull. She was clean, scrubbed raw, and without the layer of grime and the distraction of the rain, she was striking. Not pretty in the conventional sense. She was arresting. Her eyes were huge, framed by dark lashes. Her neck was long, elegant. She looked like a swan that had been raised by ducks. She walked into the living room, barefoot. Her toes curled into the expensive carpet. "I didn't have any clothes," she said softly. "I hope this is okay." Michael stared. He tried to summon his usual coldness, his armor of indifference, but his tongue felt thick. She smelled like his soap, bergamot and black pepper. The scent that was usually only on his skin was now on hers. It was a branding, a claiming he hadn't intended to make. "It's fine," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "I'm hungry," she admitted, the confession costing her dignity. Michael gestured to the dining table. While she was showering, he had made a call. On the table sat a silver tray. Roasted chicken, steamed vegetables, warm bread. Simple food. Warm food. Chloe looked at the food, then at him. Her eyes welled up, just a little. A shimmer of tears she refused to let fall. "Thank you," she whispered. She sat down and began to eat. She tried to be polite, to use the silverware correctly, but her hunger was a primal force. Her hands shook as she tore a piece of bread. Michael watched her. He didn't eat. He leaned back in the shadows of the living room, his face obscured, his eyes tracking every movement. He watched her throat move as she swallowed. He watched the color slowly return to her cheeks. He watched life flooding back into her. And he felt a terrifying realization settle in his chest. He had brought her here to break her, to prove a point about the weakness of the human spirit. But as he watched her eat his bread, wearing his robe, smelling like his soap, he realized the danger wasn't that she would break. The danger was that he would want to keep the pieces. "Slow down," he said, stepping out of the shadows. He poured a glass of water and placed it near her hand. She froze, looking up at him. He was close now, standing right beside her chair. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping her mouth with a napkin. "I haven't eaten since yesterday morning." Michael's jaw tightened. A flash of anger, hot and unfamiliar, surged through him. Not at her. At the world that had let her starve. At the men who had walked past her on the street. "You will eat every day here," Michael said. It sounded like a threat. "That is the first rule." "Are there many rules?" Chloe asked, looking up at him through her lashes. Michael looked down at her. The distance between them was less than a foot. He could see the pulse jumping in the hollow of her throat. "Only one that matters," he murmured, leaning down, his hand gripping the back of her chair, boxing her in. Chloe stopped chewing. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She could feel his breath on her cheek. "Don't make me regret this," Michael whispered. "And don't look at me like I'm the hero. I'm the villain in this story, Chloe. Never forget that." He pulled back before the gravity of the moment could pull him in completely. "Sleep," he commanded. "We start tomorrow." He turned and walked toward his own bedroom, closing the door with a finality that echoed through the penthouse. But for the first time in 10 years, Michael Vane didn't lock his door. Daylight in the penthouse was not gentle. It was an interrogation. The sun didn't just shine. It exploded through the floor-to-ceiling glass, illuminating every dust mote, not that there were any, and every flaw. Chloe woke up gasping. For a split second, her brain panicked, searching for the familiar cracks in the ceiling of her basement apartment, the smell of mildew, the sound of the leaking pipe. Instead, she found herself drowning in white silk. The bed was vast, an island. She lay in the center of it, curled into a tight ball, her body still remembering the cold of the street, even though the room was perfectly climate-controlled. She sat up, pushing the heavy duvet away. She felt expensive. The sheets against her skin were softer than anything she had ever touched. She slid out of bed, her feet sinking into the plush carpet. She walked to the window. New York City lay spread out below her, stripped of its mystery by the morning sun. From here, the cars looked like beetles. The people were invisible. It was a God's eye view. It looks different when you're not underneath its boot, doesn't it? Chloe spun around. Michael was standing in the doorway. If he had looked dangerous the night before, he looked devastating now. He was dressed for war. A charcoal three-piece suit, tailored to within an inch of its life, a crisp white shirt, and a tie the color of blood. He was holding 2 mugs of coffee. He didn't look like he had slept. His eyes were alert, scanning her face with that same intensity that made her want to hide and step closer at the same time. "I didn't hear you," she whispered, pulling the oversized robe tighter around her throat. I know. You sleep like the dead. It's concerning. He walked into the room, crossing the boundary of her sanctuary without hesitation. He held out one of the mugs. Chloe took it. Her fingers brushed his. A spark, static and sharp, snapped between them. Michael didn't pull away this time. He held her gaze. Black, he said. I assumed you didn't take sugar. You don't look like someone who gets many sweet things. It was a dig, a reminder of who she was. I take it however it comes, Chloe said, lifting the mug. The steam hit her face. Rich, roasted Arabica. It smelled like money. She took a sip. It scalded her tongue, but she welcomed the pain. It proved she was awake. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Michael turned, walking toward the living room. The stylist will be here in 20 minutes. Chloe lowered the mug. The what? The stylist, Michael called back, not stopping. You can't walk around my house wearing a robe that trails 3 feet on the floor, and your other clothes have been incinerated. Incinerated? Chloe chased after him, her bare feet patting quickly on the hardwood. You burned my clothes? They were a biohazard, Chloe. They were mine. She stopped in the middle of the living room. My uniform, my jeans. That poncho cost me $12. Michael stopped at the kitchen island. He picked up a tablet, scrolling through emails, seemingly bored by her outrage. I will reimburse you for the poncho, he said dryly. With interest. Now, drink your coffee. You have a busy day of doing absolutely nothing while people fuss over you. I'm not a doll, Michael. Her voice was quiet, but it carried a steeliness that made Michael pause. He lowered the tablet. He looked at her. She looked ridiculous. Tiny in the massive robe, hair messy from sleep, holding a mug with both hands like a child. But her chin was lifted. Her eyes were blazing. There it is, he thought. The fire. No, Michael said slowly, walking around the island until he was standing in front of her. You are not a doll. A doll is plastic, hollow. You are flesh and blood, which makes you much more complicated. He reached out. Chloe stopped breathing. His hand hovered near her face. For a terrifying, heart-stopping moment, she thought he was going to caress her cheek. She braced herself for the touch, half afraid, half desperate for it. But he didn't touch her skin. He reached for the lapel of the robe, which had slipped slightly, revealing the curve of her collarbone. He adjusted the fabric, pulling it closed, covering her up. His knuckles grazed the sensitive skin of her neck. A trail of heat left in his wake. Cover up, Chloe, he murmured, his voice rough. The staff is arriving. I don't share my things. My things. Before she could process the possessiveness of that statement, the elevator chimed. The next 2 hours were a whirlwind of humiliation and luxury. A woman named Elena, sharp features, sharper tongue, and 2 assistants descended upon Chloe like vultures. They measured her, poked her, and draped fabrics against her skin. She has no hips, Elena complained, talking about Chloe as if she wasn't there. And her skin tone is washed out. We need color. No red. Michael's voice cut through the room from his desk in the corner. He hadn't looked up from his laptop once, yet he was listening to every word. Nothing flashy. Soft fabrics, cashmere, silk, pastels, and neutrals. She needs to look. He paused. Protected. Chloe stood on the pedestal, arms out, feeling exposed. She looked at Michael. He was typing furiously, but the line of his shoulders was tense. Why was he doing this? By noon, Chloe was transformed. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater that felt like a cloud, and soft gray trousers that fit perfectly. Her hair had been brushed and tamed into soft waves. She looked in the mirror and didn't recognize herself. The girl from the corner, the girl with the desperate eyes and the wet sneakers, was gone. In her place was someone who looked like she belonged in this tower, and she hated it, because it felt like a costume, a disguise to hide the truth. Better, Elena the stylist said, packing up her bags. "She cleans up nice, Mr. Vane." "Leave us," Michael said. The room cleared instantly. Michael stood up. He walked toward her, his eyes scanning the finished product. He circled her slowly. "Does it fit?" he asked. "It fits," Chloe said, her voice hollow. "It's beautiful. Thank you. You don't sound grateful." "I feel like an imposter, Michael. I feel like I'm wearing a lie." Michael stopped in front of her. "We all wear lies, Chloe. My suit is a lie. It tells the world I am civilized, when we both know I am not. Your rags were a lie. They told the world you were worthless, when we both know you are not." He stepped closer. "This isn't a costume. It's armor. Wear it." The elevator chimed again. This time the atmosphere in the room shifted. Michael's spine stiffened. He glanced at his watch. "I wasn't expecting anyone," he muttered. The doors opened. A woman stepped out. She was everything Chloe was not. Tall, statuesque, with hair like liquid gold, and a red dress that screamed confidence. She walked into the penthouse as if she owned the deed. "Michael, darling," she purred, her voice dripping with familiarity. "You haven't answered my texts all morning. I was worried you'd been kidnapped." She stopped dead when she saw Chloe. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. The woman's eyes, green and predatory, raked over Chloe, taking in the cashmere, the bare feet, the morning intimacy of the scene. "Oh," the woman said. Her smile didn't waver, but the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "I see. I didn't realize you had company. I thought you had stopped picking up strays, Michael." Chloe felt the shame rise up her neck like bile. Stray. That's exactly what she was. "Isabella," Michael said. His voice was ice. "You were not invited. I have the security codes, darling. We have a merger to discuss." Isabella walked closer to Chloe, invading her personal space. She smelled of expensive perfume, sharp, chemical, overpowering. "Who is this?" "The new maid." "You really shouldn't dress the help in cashmere, Michael. It gives them ideas." Chloe shrank back. The beautiful clothes suddenly felt like they were burning her skin. She opened her mouth to speak, to apologize, to leave. "Don't," Michael warned. But he wasn't talking to Chloe. He moved. Fast. In 2 strides, he was between the women, placing his body as a physical shield in front of Chloe. He turned his back on Isabella, looking directly down at Chloe. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. Chloe nodded, mute. Michael turned slowly to face Isabella. His face was a mask of deadly calm. "Isabella," he said softly. "Apologize." Isabella laughed, a nervous, tinkling sound. "Don't be ridiculous, Michael. It's just a little joke." "Who is she?" "Seriously." "She is my guest," Michael said. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was crushing. "And in this house, nobody insults my guests. Not even you. Especially not you." He took a step toward Isabella. The powerful, confident woman actually took a step back. "You have the security codes," Michael continued, his voice low and dangerous. "That will change in 5 minutes. Silas is downstairs. He will escort you out. If you ever speak to her like that again, the merger is dead. Do you understand?" Isabella paled. "You're serious? Over her?" "Yes," Michael said. "Over her." Isabella glared at Chloe, a look of pure venom, before spinning on her heel and marching back to the elevator. The doors closed, swallowing her red dress and her toxic perfume. Silence returned to the penthouse. Chloe was trembling. Michael turned to her. The anger vanished from his face, replaced by something exhaustion. He ran a hand through his perfect hair, messing it up. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't think she would come here." "She was right," Chloe whispered. "I am a stray." "Stop it." Michael grabbed her shoulders. His grip was firm, grounding. His thumbs pressed into the soft cashmere, finding the warmth of her skin underneath. "Look at me," he commanded. She looked up. His eyes were storm gray, swirling with frustration and something else. Desire? "You are not a stray," Michael said fiercely. "You are the only real thing in this entire damn city. That woman, she is a shark in a dress. You are—" He trailed off. He seemed to realize how close they were. He was holding her. He hadn't touched anyone like this in years. Without an agenda, without violence. He was just holding her. Chloe felt the heat of his hands seeping into her shoulders. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could feel it through the layers of wool. "What am I, Michael?" she breathed. Michael looked at her lips. The question hung in the air, dangerous and inviting. "You are my undoing," he thought. But he couldn't say it. Not yet. He released her abruptly, stepping back as if he had been burned. "You are late for lunch," he said, his voice flat, trying to rebuild the walls he had just knocked down. "I'll be in my office. Don't disturb me." He walked away, but Chloe saw his hand clench into a fist at his side. She saw the tension in his back. She stood alone in the middle of the room, wrapped in cashmere, feeling more confused and more alive than she had ever felt in the rain. He had defended her. The dragon had breathed fire to protect the flower. And for the first time, Chloe wondered if maybe, just maybe, the dragon was lonely too. Night did not fall in the penthouse. It rose from the streets below, a tide of darkness swallowing the light until only the city's artificial pulse remained. It was 3 a.m., the witching hour. The hour when defenses crumble, and the truth comes out to play. Michael Vane was awake. He sat in his study, a glass of scotch untouched on the mahogany desk. The only light came from the glowing embers of a digital clock and the lightning storm raging outside. He wasn't working. The spreadsheets on his laptop had blurred into meaningless patterns hours ago. He was listening. His penthouse was soundproofed to the highest architectural standards. It was designed to keep the noise of the world out. But tonight, it seemed designed to amplify the silence within. He could feel her presence down the hall. It was an itch under his skin, a disruption in the electromagnetic field of his life. For 10 years, this space had been a void, cold, sterile, perfect. Now there was a heartbeat in the guest room, a chaotic, living variable. He picked up the glass, the ice long since melted. He took a sip. It tasted like water. Get a grip, he told himself. She is a transaction, a charity case. In 6 days, she will be gone. But the memory of her in that cashmere sweater, looking at him as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning world, refused to fade. The dragon was lonely too. The thought had been hers, but he had felt it radiate off her like heat. Crack! A bolt of lightning split the sky, illuminating the room in a flash of stark white. Thunder followed instantly, shaking the glass walls in their frames. And then, he heard it. Not the storm. Something softer. Something worse. A cry. Muffled, strangled, but undeniable. Michael was out of his chair before the thunder faded. He didn't think. He moved on instinct. The same instinct that kept him alive in boardrooms and back alleys. He crossed the living room in long, silent strides. The hallway was a tunnel of shadows. He stopped at her door. He shouldn't go in. It was a violation of the boundaries he had set. "Don't make me regret this," he had told her. Entering her room at 3 a.m. was definitely crossing the line into regret territory. Another sound came from inside. A sob, broken and terrified. Michael pushed the door open. The room was dark, lit only by the strobe light flashes of the storm outside. Chloe was thrashing in the bed. The expensive duvet was tangled around her legs like a trap. "No," she whimpered, her voice thick with sleep and panic. "Please, I don't have it. I don't..." She was dreaming of the street, of the debts, of the men who came to collect what her father owed. Michael approached the bed. He saw the sheen of sweat on her forehead, the way her hands clawed at the sheets. "Chloe," he said, his voice low, commanding. She didn't wake. She gasped, arching her back, fighting an invisible attacker. "Let me go." Michael sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under his weight. He reached out, hesitating for a fraction of a second. Touching her was dangerous. Touching her when she was vulnerable like this was intimate. He gripped her shoulders. "Chloe, wake up." She screamed. A sharp, piercing sound that cut right through his chest. Her eyes flew open, but they weren't seeing him. They were seeing monsters. She lashed out. Her hand struck his chest, a frantic, weak blow. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the headboard, hyperventilating. "Get away!" She choked out. "I don't have the money. I don't." "Chloe!" Michael grabbed her wrists. He pinned them gently but firmly to the mattress, immobilizing her. He leaned in, forcing her to look at him. "Look at me. You're not there. You're here." Another flash of lightning lit up his face. The sharp angles, the gray eyes, the intensity. Chloe blinked, her chest heaving. The terror in her eyes slowly morphed into confusion, and then recognition. "Michael?" Her voice was a broken whisper. "Yes. I was..." She looked around the room. The luxury, the silence. The reality crashed down on her. She wasn't in the cold. She wasn't being chased. She slumped, the fight draining out of her instantly. I'm sorry. "Breathe," Michael ordered. He released her wrists, but he didn't move away. He stayed close, an anchor in the storm. "It was dark," she stammered, tears spilling over now that the adrenaline was fading. "The rain, the men, they aren't here," Michael said. "Nobody is here but me. You're scary too," she whispered, a delirious truth slipping out. Michael froze. A shadow of a smile, grim and self-deprecating, touched his lips. "I know," he said, "but I'm the monster on your side of the door." He reached for the glass of water on the nightstand and held it to her lips. His hand brushed her cheek. Her skin was burning hot, damp with feverish sweat. "Drink." She drank, her hands coming up to cover his, guiding the glass. Her fingers were shaking. His were steady as stone. The contrast again. Weakness and strength. Chaos and order. When she finished, she pulled the duvet up to her chin, shivering. The air conditioning felt freezing now that the nightmare heat was gone. "Don't go," she said. The words were quiet, barely audible over the rain. Michael was already standing up. He froze. "Chloe, please." She looked at him, her eyes huge and dark in the gloom. I can't be in the dark again, not tonight." Michael looked at the door. Escape. Sanity. The rules. He looked back at her. She was trembling. If he left, the nightmares would come back. He knew that. He knew what it was like to be haunted. With a heavy sigh, deeply resigned to his own damnation, Michael walked over to the velvet armchair in the corner of the room. He dragged it across the carpet until it was next to the bed. He sat down. He stretched out his long legs, crossing them at the ankles. He loosened his tie. "Go to sleep," he said, his voice rough. "I'm not leaving." Chloe watched him. He was a silhouette against the flashing window, a guard dog in a $3,000 suit. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. Michael leaned his head back against the chair, closing his eyes. "Because," he murmured, "I made a bet that you would survive, and I hate losing." It was a lie. They both knew it. He wasn't there for the bet. He was there because the thought of her fear made him want to tear the world apart. Chloe stared at him for a long time. The rhythm of his breathing, steady and deep, eventually synced with hers. The terror in her chest unknotted, replaced by a strange, heavy warmth. She closed her eyes. "Good night, Michael," she whispered. "Good night, Chloe." The next morning, the storm had passed. The sun was blinding. Chloe woke up slowly, feeling rested for the first time in years. She stretched, her hand hitting empty space. She looked at the chair. It was empty, but on the nightstand, next to the empty water glass, was a note. It was written on heavy, cream-colored cardstock in sharp, angular handwriting. I have meetings until 2 p.m. Eat, don't leave the building. M. And next to the note was a small velvet box. Chloe sat up, her heart doing a traitorous flip in her chest. She reached for the box. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a phone. Not just a phone, the latest model, sleek and silver. She turned it on. There was only one number saved in the contacts. The Dragon. A laugh bubbled up in her throat, a sound of pure surprise. He had a sense of humor. The cold, terrifying Michael Vane had a sense of humor. She got out of bed, clutching the phone. She felt different today. The fear of the nightmare was gone, replaced by the memory of him sitting in that chair, guarding her sleep. She walked out into the living room. It was empty, pristine as always, but on the kitchen counter, there was a vase, a crystal vase, and inside it, a single, perfect white rose. It wasn't one of the dead ones she had been selling. It was fresh, vibrant. Chloe touched the petal, soft as velvet. He hadn't just bought her clothes. He hadn't just given her a phone. He had remembered the roses. I want to make a purchase, he had said that first night. She realized then, with a jolt of panic and thrill, that the transaction had shifted. He wasn't buying her time anymore. He was courting her trust. And that was infinitely more dangerous. She went to the window, looking out at the city that usually terrified her. Today, it looked conquerable. But as she stood there, the elevator chimed. Chloe turned, expecting the stylist, or maybe housekeeping. The doors opened. 2 men stepped out. They were not stylists. They were wide, dressed in cheap suits that didn't fit, with the distinct, predatory walk of men who hurt people for a living. One of them, a man with a jagged scar running through his eyebrow, smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Well, well, the man said, stepping onto Michael's pristine Persian rug with muddy boots. Looks like the little bird flew all the way to the top of the tower. Chloe's blood turned to ice. She recognized him. It was Vinny, her father's bookie, the man from her nightmare. How, she whispered, stepping back until her spine hit the glass wall. How did you get in here? We have friends in low places, sweetheart. Vinny sneered, pulling a switchblade from his pocket. The click of the blade opening echoed in the silent penthouse. And friends in high places who don't like Mr. Vane very much. He took a step forward. Daddy didn't pay up, Chloe. And now that you're living the high life, we figure the interest rate just went up. Chloe looked at the phone in her hand. The Dragon. She didn't hesitate. She pressed the call button. Vinny lunged. Boardroom of Vane Enterprises' 40th floor. The air in the conference room was stale, recycled, and filled with the droning voice of the CFO. Quarterly projections indicate a 3% drop in logistics revenue if the dock strike continues. Michael Vane sat at the head of the table. He was a statue carved from ice. He wasn't listening to the projections. He knew the numbers better than the man presenting them. He was thinking about a white rose in a crystal vase. He checked his watch. 10:14 a.m. She should be awake. She should be safe. His phone, resting face up on the black mahogany table, vibrated. It was a single, short buzz. Normally, Michael ignored phones during meetings. It was a power move. But when the screen lit up, the name Little Flower flashed across it. He had programmed that name himself, a momentary lapse of sentimentality that he had intended to change. He reached for the phone, his movement slow, deliberate. He swiped to answer. Chloe? He didn't hear a hello. He heard a scream. It was high, terrified, and cut short by the sound of shattering glass. Then, a male voice he didn't recognize, distorted and ugly. Grab her legs. Don't let her kick. The world inside the boardroom stopped. The CFO stopped talking. The air conditioning seemed to freeze. Michael stood up. The heavy leather chair flew backward, crashing into the wall with a violence that made 3 board members jump. "Mr. Vane?" someone asked, terrified. Michael didn't speak. His face, usually a mask of indifference, had contorted into something primal. His eyes were black voids. He walked out of the room. He didn't run. Running implied panic. Michael Vane didn't panic. He executed. He brought the phone to his lips as he strode toward the elevator bank. "Silas," he said. The voice was unrecognizable, a low, guttural growl. "Penthouse. Breach. Kill order authorized." He hit the elevator button. It was too slow. He turned to the stairwell door, kicked it open, and began to take the stairs 3 at a time. He wasn't a CEO anymore. The suit was just a costume. The dragon was awake and he was hungry for blood. The penthouse. Chloe scrambled over the back of the sofa, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The vase, the beautiful crystal vase with the white rose, lay in shatters on the floor. She had thrown it at Vinny's head. She missed. "You little brat," Vinny spat, wiping a speck of water from his cheek. "You think you're tough because you're sleeping in a castle?" The second man, a brute named Marco, lunged for her. Chloe kicked out. Her heel connected with his shin. It wasn't enough. Marco grunted, grabbed her ankle, and yanked. Chloe hit the floor hard. The breath left her lungs in a painful whoosh. The carpet burned her skin as she was dragged backward. "No, let me go." She clawed at the rug, at the furniture leg, at anything. "Hold her down," Vinny commanded, walking over with the switchblade. The silver metal caught the sunlight, a perverse beauty in the violence. "We're going to leave a message for your boyfriend." A message carved right into that pretty face. Chloe squeezed her eyes shut. She screamed Michael's name in her head. "The dragon. Please. Please." Vinny knelt on her chest. The weight was crushing. The knife tip hovered inches from her eye. "Open your eyes," Vinny hissed. "I want you to see it." Ding. The sound was cheerful, musical, completely out of place. The elevator doors at the far end of the room slid open. Vinny froze. He looked up. There was no army, no security team, just one man. Michael stood in the elevator car. His chest was heaving slightly from the sprint up 10 flights of stairs. His tie was gone. His collar was unbuttoned. But it was the look on his face that made Vinny's blood run cold. It wasn't anger. It was an absolute, terrifying stillness. It was the look of a reaper who had just clocked in for work. "Get off her," Michael said. The voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It vibrated through the floorboards. Vinny laughed, though it sounded shaky. He stood up, keeping one foot on Chloe's chest to pin her down. He waved the knife. "Or what, rich boy? You gonna throw your wallet at me?" Michael didn't answer. He stepped out of the elevator. He walked, slowly, rhythmically. Thud, thud, thud. "I said stay back," Vinny yelled, unnerved by the lack of fear. "I'll cut her. I swear to God I'll—" Michael moved. It was a blur. 1 second he was walking. The next he was a missile. He closed the distance in 2 strides. Vinny thrust the knife. "Amateur move." Michael caught Vinny's wrist in mid-air. The sound of the bone snapping was loud, like a dry branch breaking in a winter forest. Vinny screamed. The knife dropped. Michael didn't stop. He spun, driving his elbow into Vinny's throat. The scream cut off into a wet gurgle. Vinny collapsed, clutching his neck, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Marco, the big one, roared and charged. Michael didn't even look at him. He sidestepped, grabbed Marco's head, and slammed it into the marble countertop of the wet bar. Crack. Marco crumpled like a puppet with cut strings. It was over in 10 seconds. Silence rushed back into the room, heavier than before. The only sound was Vinny's wheezing on the floor and Chloe's frantic, sobbing breaths. Michael stood over the bodies. He straightened his cuffs. He looked at his hands. His knuckles were split. A smear of blood, not his, stained his white shirt. He turned slowly, Chloe was still on the floor, curled into a ball, shaking so violently her teeth chattered. She was staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. She had seen the businessman. She had seen the protector. Now, she had seen the killer. Michael's expression crumbled. The mask fell away, revealing raw panic. Chloe. He fell to his knees. He didn't care about the glass shards digging into his expensive trousers. He didn't care about the blood pooling near his shoes. He hit the floor hard, sliding the last few inches to reach her, his breathing ragged and harsh in the sudden silence. The monster was gone. All that was left was a man terrified that he was too late. Michael hit his knees. He didn't care that he was ruining a $5,000 suit. He didn't care that Silas was exiting the elevator behind him, gun drawn, assessing the threat. He only cared about the girl shivering on the carpet. Chloe. He reached for her, but stopped. His hands were shaking. He looked at his knuckles, red, split, stained. He looked at her, pale, fragile, untouched by the blood, but shattered by the violence. I did this, the voice in his head screamed. I brought the wolf to the lamb's door. Did they cut you? Michael demanded, his voice cracking. It was a sound he didn't recognize. Chloe, look at me. Did they cut you? Chloe blinked. The fog of shock was slowly lifting, replaced by the stinging reality of the bruises forming on her arms. She looked at Michael. He looked terrified. The man who had just dismantled 2 hitmen like they were made of paper was now looking at her with absolute, unadulterated fear. No, she whispered. Her throat hurt. No, I'm okay. You're not okay. Michael cursed, a vicious sound. He scanned her body with surgical precision. No blood on her clothes, just the red marks on her wrists where Vinny had pinned her. His jaw tightened until a muscle feathering in his cheek jumped. Silas! Michael barked without looking back. Sir, Silas replied, his voice calm. He was already checking Vinny's pulse. Trash is secure. Cleanup crew is 5 minutes out. Get them out of my sight. Burn the rug. Burn everything they touched. Michael turned back to Chloe. He didn't ask for permission this time. He slid his arms under her, one under her knees, one behind her back, and lifted her. She gasped, instinctively wrapping her arms around his neck. She buried her face in his shirt. It smelled of sweat, starch, and the metallic tang of violence. But underneath that, it smelled like him, cedar and safety. I've got you, Michael murmured against her hair. I've got you. He carried her away from the carnage, down the hall, past the shattered vase, and into the master bathroom. He kicked the door shut behind him, sealing them off from the ugly reality of his world. He set her down on the vanity counter. The marble was cold against her legs, grounding her. Michael stepped back, running his hands through his hair, leaving a streak of red near his temple. He was pacing again. The dragon was pacing in a cage of guilt. I should have known, he muttered to himself. I got careless. I let them track the car. He looked up and saw her watching him. She wasn't crying anymore. She was just watching. Her eyes were wide, dark pools reflecting his own disarray. You're bleeding, she said softly. Michael looked at his hands. It's not mine. Your knuckle is split. She reached out. Michael flinched back as if she had brandished a knife. Don't. Michael. Don't touch me, Chloe. His voice was harsh, raw. Look at me. Look at what I am. I broke a man's neck in front of you. I am covered in filth. He backed up until he hit the glass shower door. He looked like a cornered animal, a dangerous one that was afraid of biting the hand that fed it. I am not the hero, he rasped. I told you. I warned you. Chloe sat on the counter, her legs dangling. She felt the bruise on her chest throbbing. She remembered the knife. She remembered the terror. But she also remembered the elevator doors opening. She remembered the way he had looked. Not like a killer enjoying the kill, but like a man desperate to save the only thing that mattered. She slid off the counter. Her legs were shaky, but she stood. She walked toward him. "Stop," Michael warned. She didn't stop. She closed the distance. She reached out and took his hand, the one with the split knuckle, the one stained with violence. "You're shaking," she whispered. Michael stared at her hand holding his. Her skin was so pale against the red, so clean. "You should be running," he said, his voice broken. "Why aren't you running?" "Because you came back," Chloe said simply. "You ran up 10 flights of stairs. You came back for me." She led him to the sink. He followed, docile, stunned by her lack of fear. She turned on the tap. Warm water rushed out. She took a pristine white washcloth from the stack. "Let me," she said. Michael stood frozen as she took his hand. She wet the cloth. Gently, with infinite care, she began to wipe the blood from his skin. The water in the basin turned pink. The silence in the room was heavy, but it wasn't oppressive anymore. It was the silence of a church, or a confession. She cleaned his knuckles. She dabbed at the cut. The soap stung, but Michael didn't feel it. He only felt her fingers. Her touch was rewriting the neural pathways of his brain, replacing the adrenaline with something slower, deeper, hotter. When his hands were clean, she reached up. She wiped the streak of blood from his temple. Her eyes met his. They were inches apart. The air between them crackled. Michael's breathing hitched. His resistance shattered. He reached out, his clean hands framing her face. He tipped her head back. "I will burn this city to the ground," he whispered, a vow made against her lips. "Before I let anyone touch you again." Chloe's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "I believe you." Michael's gaze dropped to her mouth. He was going to kiss her. He had to kiss her. It was a biological imperative, the need to affirm life after dealing death. He leaned in. Chloe's eyes fluttered shut. She tilted her head, inviting him. "Knock. Knock." The sound was soft, respectful, but it was like a hammer shattering glass. "Sir?" Silas's voice came through the door. "The cleanup is done. But we have a problem. The police are on the perimeter." Michael froze. His lips were a breath away from hers. He squeezed his eyes shut, a mask of pained frustration. He pulled back, slowly, reluctantly. He rested his forehead against hers for 1 second, a stolen moment of peace. "We have to go," he whispered. "Go where?" Chloe asked, opening her eyes. Michael straightened up. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by the steel mask of the strategist. But his eyes were still burning. "My private jet is at Teterboro," Michael said. "Pack a bag, Chloe. We're leaving New York." "For how long?" Michael looked at her, and for the first time he smiled. It was a dark, possessive smile. "Until the world forgets you exist," he said. "Or until I make them remember who owns it." He turned and opened the door. "Welcome to my world, little flower. There's no turning back now." The tarmac at Teterboro Airport was a slick black mirror reflecting the runway lights. The Gulfstream G650 sat waiting, its engines already whining with a high-pitched, impatient scream. It looked like a silver bullet loaded in a chamber, ready to be fired into the night. Michael didn't speak as he guided Chloe up the stairs. His hand was pressed flat against the small of her back, a touch that was possessive, guiding, and undeniably protective. He shielded her from the wind with his body, just as he had in the elevator. Inside, the jet was warmer than a house and quieter than a library. It smelled of white leather and fresh espresso. The lighting was dim, golden, designed to soothe billionaires and warlords. "Sit," Michael commanded softly, pointing to a cream-colored leather captain's chair. Chloe sank into it. The leather swallowed her. She felt absurdly small. She was still wearing the gray trousers and the cashmere sweater, now slightly rumpled from the struggle. Silas followed them in, locking the heavy door with a mechanical thud that sealed out the world. "Flight plan filed for Tuscany, sir," Silas said, moving toward the cockpit. "Wheels up in 2 minutes." "Tuscany?" Chloe looked at Michael. Her voice was barely a whisper. Italy? Michael was already at the minibar, pouring 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal tumbler. He didn't look at her. He looked at the liquid swirling in the glass. It's the only place they won't look for at least 48 hours, he said. He downed the drink in 1 swallow. It didn't burn. Nothing burned right now. He was numb. The engines roared. The plane began to move. Michael walked over to the seat opposite hers. He didn't sit. He crouched down in the aisle, balancing easily as the jet accelerated. "Buckle up," he said. Chloe fumbled with the clasp. Her fingers were still shaking. The adrenaline crash was hitting her hard, leaving her limbs feeling like lead. "Let me." Michael brushed her hands aside. He clicked the belt into place, tightening the strap across her lap. His knuckles, the ones she had cleaned, were wrapped in white gauze. The sight of the bandages made Chloe's chest ache. He stayed there for a moment, on one knee, looking up at her. The plane tilted back, defying gravity. The force pressed them into their seats, but Michael didn't move. He held onto the armrests of her chair, boxing her in. "Are you afraid of flying?" he asked. "I've never been on a plane," Chloe admitted. "I've never left the state." Michael's eyes softened, just a fraction. A crack in the armor. "The takeoff is the worst part," he murmured. "It feels like falling, but in reverse. Just look at me. Look at you. Don't look out the window. Don't look at the ground leaving. Look at me." Chloe locked eyes with him. Gray into brown, storm into earth. The jet lurched, lifting off the ground. Chloe gasped, gripping the leather. But she didn't look away. She anchored herself to Michael's gaze. He was the only stationary point in a moving universe. For 30 seconds, the world was just the roar of turbines and the intensity of his stare. Then, the angle leveled out. The roar dulled to a steady, expensive hum. "We're up," Michael said quietly. He stood up, the spell breaking. He walked back to the bar, pouring another drink. Chloe watched him. He looked exhausted. The fluorescent lights of the galley highlighted the dark circles under his eyes and the tension in his shoulders. He took off his suit jacket, tossing it onto a sofa. He loosened his tie, pulling it free and dropping it. It was a striptease of exhaustion. He was shedding the layers of the boss. "You should sleep," Michael said, turning to face her. "There's a bedroom in the back, a real bed." "I can't sleep," Chloe said. "My heart is still racing." "Then drink this." He walked back, handing her a glass of water. "Hydrate. The air up here dries you out." He sat down in the chair opposite her, swiveling it so they were facing each other, knees almost touching in the narrow aisle. "Who were they?" Chloe asked. She needed to know. The silence was filling with monsters again. Michael sighed, rubbing his face with his uninjured hand. "Creditors, low-level sharks. Your father's debt was sold to a syndicate that doesn't respect boundaries." "They knew who you were," Chloe said, "and they didn't care." "They cared," Michael corrected. His voice was dark. "That's why they came. They wanted to hurt me, and they figured out the math." "The math?" "The equation of leverage." Michael looked at her, his expression intense. "To hurt a man like me, you don't attack his money. You don't attack his property. You attack the one thing he has been foolish enough to protect." Chloe felt the heat rise in her cheeks. "So I'm a liability," she whispered. Michael laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "A liability?" He shook his head. "Chloe, a liability is a bad investment. You are a catastrophe." He reached out, his hand hovering near her knee, then retreating. "I have spent 10 years building a fortress around my life. No attachments, no weaknesses. I was untouchable." He looked at his bandaged hand. "And then I saw you in the rain. And in less than 48 hours, I have brought violence into my home. I have fled my city, and I am currently flying to a safe house I haven't visited since my father died." "I'm sorry," Chloe said, tears pricking her eyes. I'll go. Once we land, I'll go. I won't cause any more trouble." Michael looked at her sharply. The predator was back. "You're not going anywhere." "But you just said—" "I said you were a catastrophe," Michael interrupted, his voice dropping to a growl. "I didn't say I wanted to prevent it." The air in the cabin grew thin. Michael stood up abruptly, unable to sit still with the energy coursing through him. "You are mine to protect now," he stated, pacing the small space. "That was the deal. The week isn't over." "And after the week?" Chloe challenged, emboldened by the altitude. "What happens when the contract ends, Michael? Do you just drop me back on the corner?" Michael stopped pacing. He stood over her. "Do you want to go back to the corner?" "No." "Then stop asking questions I don't have the answers to yet." He ran a hand through his hair. "I need to shower. I need to wash the rest of this day off me." He pointed to a door at the rear of the cabin. "The bedroom is through there. Sleep, Chloe. When you wake up, the sky will be different." He turned and walked into the small bathroom, locking the door. Chloe sat alone in the luxury of the main cabin. She looked out the window. Below her, the Atlantic Ocean was a vast, black void. She touched her chest, right where her heart was beating against her ribs. A catastrophe. He had called her a catastrophe, but the way he said it sounded like a prayer. She unbuckled her belt. She walked to the back of the plane. The bedroom was small, but opulent. A queen-sized bed with Egyptian cotton sheets took up most of the space. There was a small porthole window. Chloe crawled onto the bed. She didn't get under the covers. She curled up on top of the duvet, clutching a pillow. She listened. She could hear the shower running in the bathroom next door. She imagined him standing under the water, washing away the blood, the stress, the weight of the crown he wore. The sound was comforting. It meant he was close. Minutes passed. The water stopped. The door opened. Chloe squeezed her eyes shut, pretending to be asleep. She didn't know why. Maybe because she was afraid of what she would see in his eyes if she looked now. She heard his footsteps. Soft, barefoot on the carpet. She felt the mattress dip. He didn't touch her. He just sat on the edge of the bed. She could smell him. Fresh soap, toothpaste, and the underlying scent of warm, clean skin. Michael sat there for a long time. He watched the rise and fall of her breathing. He saw her hand clutching the pillow, her knuckles white. He knew she wasn't asleep. "I never lose bets, Chloe," he whispered into the darkness. It was a confession meant only for the shadows. "But I think I lost this one the moment I opened the car door." He reached out. This time he didn't pull back. His fingers, cool and gentle, brushed a stray lock of hair away from her forehead. His touch lingered on her temple, a feather-like caress that burned like a brand. "Sleep," he commanded softly. He stood up and walked out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar so he could hear her if she cried out again. Chloe lay in the dark, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. She pressed her hand to the spot on her forehead where he had touched her. She smiled into the pillow. The dragon wasn't just guarding the tower anymore. He was guarding her. Italy didn't look like a country. It looked like a painting that was still wet. Chloe stepped off the jet onto the private airstrip in Florence, and the first thing that hit her was the heat. It wasn't the biting, humid exhaust heat of New York. It was a dry, golden warmth that smelled of pine needles and baked earth. She blinked, shielding her eyes. The sky was an impossible shade of blue. "Put these on." Michael's voice came from behind her. He slid a pair of sunglasses onto her face. The world dimmed to a manageable sepia tone. Chloe turned to look at him, and stopped. The suit was gone. For the first time since she had met him, Michael Vane wasn't wearing armor. He was wearing a white linen shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and dark navy chinos. He looked younger. Dangerous, still. He would always look dangerous, but less like a weapon and more like a man. "We're not taking the car?" Chloe asked, looking for the armored SUV. "Not today," Michael said. He walked toward a vehicle parked in the shade of a hangar. It wasn't an SUV. It was a vintage Alfa Romeo Spider, convertible, painted a deep, blood red. In Tuscany, we drive with the top down. It's the law. He tossed their bags into the trunk with an easy grace. Get in. The drive to the villa was a sensory overload. Michael drove fast, his hands relaxed on the wooden steering wheel, navigating the winding cypress-lined roads as if he had been born on them. The wind whipped Chloe's hair around her face. She laughed. She couldn't help it. The sound bubbled up from her chest, unbidden. She had been terrified, threatened, and kidnapped in the last 48 hours. But right now, with the wind in her lungs and the sun on her skin, she felt euphoric. Michael glanced at her. He saw her head thrown back, her throat exposed to the sun, a genuine smile lighting up her face. His grip on the steering wheel tightened. Not out of anger, but out of a sudden, possessive awe. He had bought her clothes. He had bought her safety. But he hadn't bought that laugh. That was free. And it was the most valuable thing he had seen in years. Don't get used to it, he warned himself. This is an interlude, not a life. They turned off the main road onto a gravel path that climbed steeply up a hill. At the top, rising from the vineyards like a crown of stone, sat the villa. Villa Oscura. It was ancient. The stone walls were weathered and covered in ivy. It looked less like a house and more like a fortress that had decided to become a home. It's a castle, Chloe breathed as the car crunched to a halt in the courtyard. It was a monastery in the 14th century, Michael explained, cutting the engine. The silence that followed was filled only by the chirping of cicadas. Then a fortress. Now, it's just a place to disappear. He got out and opened her door. Is there staff? Chloe asked, looking at the massive oak doors. Only a caretaker who lives in the village below. He stocked the fridge and left. We are alone, Chloe. Alone. The word hung in the warm air, heavy with implication. Inside, the villa was cool and shadowed. It smelled of lemon oil, old books, and stone. The floors were terracotta tile, worn smooth by centuries of feet. Your room is the tower suite, Michael said, pointing up a winding stone staircase. It has the best view of the valley. I'll take the master suite on the ground floor. He was putting distance between them, physical distance, walls, floors. Go, he said gently. Wash the travel off. I'll make dinner. You cook? Chloe raised an eyebrow. Michael smirked, a real crooked smirk that made Chloe's knees weak. I'm Italian, Chloe. If I couldn't cook, my grandmother would rise from her grave and haunt me. Go. An hour later, Chloe came downstairs. She had showered in a bathroom that overlooked an olive grove. She had changed into a simple white sundress she found in the wardrobe. Another purchase by the stylist, no doubt. It was light, airy, and moved with her. She found Michael in the kitchen. It was a rustic room with copper pots hanging from the ceiling and a massive wooden table in the center. Michael was standing at the stove, stirring a pan of pasta. He had a glass of red wine in one hand. The setting sun streamed through the window, bathing him in amber light. He looked so domestic. It was jarring. The dragon in an apron, metaphorically. He turned when he heard her bare feet on the tiles. His eyes widened slightly as they swept over the white dress. Hungry? He asked, his voice a little rougher than before. Starving, Chloe admitted, moving to the island. What is it? Cacio e pepe, cheese and pepper. Simple, peasant food. He plated the pasta with practiced ease and slid a bowl toward her. Eat. They ate on the terrace, overlooking the valley as the sun dipped below the horizon, turning the sky into a bruise of purple and orange. The wine was rich and dark. The pasta was the best thing Chloe had ever tasted. So, Chloe said, twirling her fork. The wine had given her courage. Is this the real Michael Vane? The man who drives vintage cars and cooks pasta? Michael took a sip of wine, looking out at the darkening vineyards. No, he said. This is the ghost of Michael Vane, the man I might have been if my father hadn't been who he was. Tell me about him. Chloe said softly. Michael looked at her. Usually he shut down these questions. But here, in the quiet, with her looking at him like that, the words just came. He was a king, Michael said bitterly. And kings don't have sons. They have heirs. He taught me that love is a liability, that trust is a weakness. He built the empire I run today. And are you happy running it? Michael laughed softly. Happiness wasn't part of the inheritance, little flower. Power was. He reached for the bottle and refilled her glass. But you saved me, Chloe pointed out. That wasn't a power move. That was selfish, Michael interrupted. He leaned forward, his elbows on the stone table. The candle between them flickered, casting shadows on his face. I didn't save you because I'm good. I saved you because I couldn't stand the idea of someone else breaking you. I wanted to be the one to decide your fate. And what have you decided? Chloe whispered. The air between them suddenly felt charged, electric. Michael looked at her lips, then up to her eyes. I decided that I don't want to break you anymore, he murmured. I want to keep you whole. He stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the stone. The intimacy was getting too thick, too dangerous. I need to check the perimeter, he said, his voice clipped. Stay inside. He walked away, stepping into the shadows of the garden. Chloe watched him go. She didn't feel rejected. She felt seen. She finished her wine, feeling the warmth spread through her limbs. She wasn't going to stay inside. Not tonight. She waited 10 minutes, then walked down the stone steps into the garden. The air was heavy with the scent of jasmine. The moon was full, illuminating the rows of cypress trees. She found him by the pool, an infinity edge looking out over the cliff. He was smoking a cigarette, looking at the water. You shouldn't be out here, he said without turning around. I'm not afraid, Chloe said, walking up behind him. You should be. Michael dropped the cigarette and crushed it under his heel. He turned to face her. We are alone, Chloe. There are no cameras here, no staff, no witnesses. Is that a threat? It's a warning. He took a step toward her. In New York, I could hide behind the work, behind the suits. Here, there is nothing to stop me from taking what I want. Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't back down. Maybe I don't want you to stop, she whispered. The words hung in the air, reckless and absolute. Michael froze. His eyes searched her face, looking for fear, looking for hesitation. He found neither. You don't know what you're asking, he rasped. Then show me. Michael let out a low groan, a sound of defeated restraint. He closed the distance. He didn't kiss her. Not yet. He reached out and traced the line of her jaw with his thumb. His skin was rough, warm, electric. If I kiss you, he whispered, his voice dark and jagged. The deal changes. The week doesn't end. You don't leave. Ever. Chloe looked up at him. She saw the loneliness in his eyes. She saw the dragon who was tired of guarding the treasure alone. She placed her hand over his heart. She could feel it beating. Heavy. Steady. Strong. I don't want to leave, she said. Michael stared at her for one agonizing second. Then, his hand tangled in her hair, gripping tight. Good, he growled. And then, finally, he lowered his mouth to hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was hunger, and relief, and possession all at once. It tasted of wine and danger. Chloe gasped, opening to him, melting against the hard wall of his chest. The world fell away. There was no mafia, no debt, no danger. Just the heat of the Italian night, and the man who had burned down his own rules to claim her. But as they kissed, under the moonlight of Tuscany, a phone began to ring inside the villa. Loud, persistent, an alarm.